Okay, so I think this is where we finished last lesson. We were talking about these different types of hackers, and you see they're mentioned by their hat. I think you can say that black is the bad and white is the good in terms of colors of hats for hackers. So your white hacker, they are basically trying to find vulnerabilities or weaknesses in a security system so that we can make them stronger. And a black hat is really just trying to break it for some other reason. And gray hat is kind of halfway in between there. So that's where we were. All right. So there's actually this shows up in the final exam. I remember that now. So have a look at all of these laws that we see that sort of show up in various lectures. For some reason, they seem to show up in the exam. So, you know, which law is this? Which law is that? So apparently there are some laws that affect that. Fraud and abuse law, fraud and related activity in connection with the, all right. So these laws that are mentioned in this course, they're not Qatar laws. These are laws mostly to do with the United States, and occasionally it might mention a law from the UK, but only it seems when it affects people in the United States, because, and we talked about that, like the GDPR. So these laws are all referring to laws in the United States, which US Patriot Act, that's not really about hacking. That's about the US government being able to collect information from telecom networks. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, that's going to protect people from being from having computers used to do fraud upon them, and these other things as well. All right. Now, CIA, this one is a kind of a fun one, right? CIA, when I think of the CIA, I think of what, you know, Jason Bourne. This is not Jason Bourne CIA. This is CIA, because that's the Central Intelligence Agency, right? Which is part of the United States spying thing. And now, when I look at that and I'm thinking about, we're talking about computer security, CIA, the American Central Intelligence Agency, isn't that a lot to do with computing? Well, yeah. A lot of the people that go and work there, why are they hired? They're hired because they're really excellent in computing. Those are the type of people that they want, right? I mean, spying is not really mostly people like Jason Bourne going around having fights in Manila and stuff like that. What it really is people working over computer networks and, you know, finding out about people using computers. That's what a lot of the people that work in those kind of agencies are. You could get a job probably with the Qatar government and be a spy and spend most of your time just looking at a computer. And certainly that's what happens with the United States. And also, okay, so I remember this even so far back when I first started computing back in 1987. Ads in the Australia, I lived in Australia, ads in the Australian newspaper, and it was for we have a thing called ASIC, which is the Australian version of like the CIA, and they're advertising for computer graduates to apply for jobs there. So yeah, why, right? We thought that would be good, right? So no, that's a dumb joke. I'll just leave that. So C in this case stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Do learn these. These also show up in the exam, I noticed. All right. So what we want to know is, what do these things mean? So confidentiality. If you're being attacked and your confidentiality is being breached, that means people are finding out stuff that should be kept secret, right? That they shouldn't find out about people. So they're finding out maybe your private stuff. That's your confidentiality being broken. Integrity, well, that's a little bit different. That's when the data that is in some system has become vulnerable to an attack outside and somebody's changing the data. So if you went and you hacked into the Qatar to University of Doha of Science and Technology, if you hacked into the computers, which is, I suppose, feasible, you know, well, hacking, you know, maybe you just got your teacher's credentials and then you sort of logged in like you were the teacher. Well, you could go onto PeopleSoft and you could change your marks, right? No doubt there's people would like to do that. That would be an integrity issue, because the data is no longer correct. It's not the way it should be. That's another breach. Availability. Now that's supposing you are a foreign government you're one of these spies that works for a foreign government and you want to do damage to another government, well, what you could do is you could attack their servers so that their servers became offline. One of the attacks you could do is a denial of service attack, which is you get a whole lot of bots on over the network, net bots, and you have them all make requests against that server at the same time, thousands of requests, maybe hundreds of thousands of requests. And so the server then is so busy trying to serve those requests that it's not available to people who would want to use it. You could do some lower tech availability attacks as well, I suppose, if you were able to take down power supplies and things like that. That would be availability. But yeah, I hope you understand these points, because they do, as I said, those come up in the exam. Availability is that people go to the computer network or to the server, and it's just they are not able to log in or get the result from it that they want. All right, so how does that work? Each of those things, I guess we're going to go through these in the next few slides, where we can apply the ideas of confidentiality, integrity, and availability to each of these different levels. So let's look and see. So yes, at the top level, notice there the top level is organizational level. How does CIA, how do we use this concept of CIA? Well, what we're going to do at the top level is we're going to have some kind of a plan. It refers there to a data recovery plan or a disaster recovery plan. Disaster recovery plan, planning ahead for the possible fact that your servers could be down for whatever reason. You know, power could go out, you could have an earthquake, you could have an attack, and then how do you recover from that? Well, there's a couple of things that you do in a disaster recovery plan. One is you provide some kind of, typically some kind of redundancy. Redundancy means that you have more than one way of getting the same result. So you'd have two servers offering the same data. Banks do that a lot. The other thing that you do is some kind of recovery, so that if the system went down, we've got a backup from like an hour ago, a minute ago, a day ago, whatever, and then we have somewhere where we can put that backup up. I'm going over this in like 1 minute. You could spend hours, days talking about data recovery. It's about disaster recovery plans. It's really quite a big deal. Yeah. All right. And so these two things do go together. The risk assessment. Basically, every business, well, including a college like this, needs to do a risk assessment, and then after they've finished their risk assessment, they'll come up with some kind of disaster recovery plan. The risk assessment will be looking at things like, well, what's the impact if we lost this system? And the impact could be so bad that your business would become bankrupt. Supposing you were a bank and for a week you had no computers. Right? Banks, everything's on computers, right? I mean, you know, somebody spends money somewhere, that's just moving one number from one account to another. It's all on computers. You wouldn't be in business after a week if your computers went down. So the same for like airlines. You know, there's many businesses like that. So they would have to do a risk assessment on that. Based on that risk assessment, they would then go ahead with their disaster recovery plan. And as I said, it might involve a lot of redundancy, where they say, well, you know, we just can't afford, we're a bank, we can't afford to have our computers out at all. So we're just going to mirror, we're going to have like two sets of computers doing the same thing. So if this one goes down, it's okay, we pick up the load over here. Also, we're going to have very frequent backups, you know, end of every day, end of every whatever hour, maybe, where we keep a complete backup of just our data. And so if the system goes out, we can roll back to the backup point. And, you know, we're going to have maybe a place where we have, we can do a hot backup. That is, we have computers just like this that we can just put our data onto, or maybe a cold one where we, what the banks will do is, you know, you got 5 different banks in the same country, and the banks will make an agreement with each other. If your bank computers goes down, you can use some of our spare computers for a short period of time. And the banks have agreements like that between them so that they can do a sort of a cold sort of restart of their cold recovery. All right, so we're still at the, well, we're diving down a little bit into the assessment of the risk. I would just summarize all of that. The important words there are the impact, and I kind of mentioned that in the previous slide. You know, what will happen if the computer systems goes down now? Will we be out of business? You know, the impact will be who's affected in the business? Is it the whole business? Is it just a couple of people? Is it a department? So those are the different levels of impact, right? How big is the, does it go through the system? And then you put a dollar amount on that or a real amount on that. And then you look at what you can do to stop that from happening or what you can do to getting it back up if it does happen. And that is said there in 8 different points. So security policy, that's going to be about making your system. Actually, yeah, as I said, I went and I read through the exam this morning. And so I remember these. So yeah, I remember there was a question about hardening your security. And I thought that was a bit of a strange word, but if you see that, what does it mean? If you say we're going to harden a system, that just means that to make it more resistant to an attack. All right. So in other words, you put in some layers in there, so it's harder to attack. So it's a hardened system. Now, one of the things you do is you have firewalls, but there's security is layers. So you have physical security. Any business that cares about its computer security, what they're going to have is they're going to restrict physical access to their computer areas. I mean, you can't just go and walk into our computers here. You know, you're going to have to be invited in by the computing people. Same for me. I can't go down there and just walk in there. And that's fair enough because it's not my job to go down there and moving cables around and, you know, working with hard drives in the computer system. I might know how to do that, but they're not going to allow me to because my job is teaching. You know what I mean? And so I don't need to do that. And so therefore they don't let me do that. Now, what I've actually just talked about there is a concept of separation of duties. The concept of separation of duties means that whatever your job is defined as, that determines your accessibility to the systems in your business. So, for example, yeah, well, here's the example. You're working in a bank and you have a lot of computer programmers there. The computer programmers will not have access to the systems that the accounting people have. And that just makes sense because what could the computer programmers do? They could write little programs to defraud the accounts. And so we don't let them have access to the accounts. And likewise for the accounting people, they don't get to have access to the computing systems because maybe it's a really smart accounting person who could do the same thing. Yeah, this idea of separation of duties, it's not just an IT security idea, it's a general business idea. And and what you will see, because some of you will end up doing networking at some point, you'll see that there are tools built into our computer networks and systems that make this possible. So for example, if you're running the Windows operating system as the servers, you'll be able to use an Active Directory. And the Active Directory, you'll be able to say that these groups of people have these levels of access to these systems, and they don't have access to these systems. You can actually just configure that as the IT department can do that. So there's a bunch of stuff about security. I think I've talked about that enough. The idea of an audit, I don't know if you've used that word before. The word is usually used in a business context. Accounting people use it. So when we say an audit, it means it's a historical idea. What I mean by a historical is we're not looking into the future. What we're doing is we're looking at what's happened in the past. And so the audit is we go into our systems and see what happened. So what happened in our systems? Do we see any weaknesses in our system? That would be an audit. A simple audit could be just like a physical audit where you go around this room and you see that each one of these computers has a barcode on it. That would be what we call an asset audit, right? So they would come around and just see if all of the assets that are supposed to be in this room are here. And usually when they do those asset audits, they'll find that some equipment is moved, and then they need to have some explanation. Well, why is it moved, right? You know, so now other audits that you would do is like you would look at the logs of your network, who logged on when, you know, what IP addresses were being used, because maybe you limit access to a particular range of IP addresses, that type of thing. Okay, that's all fine. So we'll just leave that. Again, I looked at the exam and there was a bunch of questions on this stuff. I'm not talking about the quiz today. I'm talking about the exam that you're having on Sunday. So do learn this stuff. It does show up there. So what is the difference between single factor authentication and multi-factor authentication? When I logged onto this just now, I had to put in my user ID and my password. And then after that, it asked me for a token. And the token was on my phone, right? Because I have a little token system that runs on there. You do the same thing when you log onto your bank account, right? Or it might take a physical thing from you, your fingerprint or something like that. But that is a two-factor. Now it's two-factor. We don't count the password and the username and password as being individual factors. They're all one factor, right? And even if I have to put in the name of the server that I'm using, because I log into a different server than you, right? So what if one of the students came up here and logged onto this computer, they would have to log into programs, but I log into the other server, you know, which is it's actually CNA /Cutter. I guess I haven't changed that yet, but but that process, me just saying, okay, I want to log on through this server, and this is my account name, and this is my password. That's all one factor. Sounds like three, but it's one. Does that make sense? But then when I start doing other stuff, like it says, please put in a token. So I have to go to my token generator, and you know, I however I get that, that's two factors. I could have three factors, but yeah, then maybe I have to get an SMS as well. I mean, you know, you can add, but using the finger and the typing thing, that's all one factor too. Does that make sense? But yeah, so if you were going to get up to three factors, it would have to be something like I use my username and password, and then I have to put in a token, and then I have an SMS that I have to use. That happens. Why do they do that? I don't know. Well, yeah, I do know, right? The same reason. Well, so why we do that is security is layered, right? The more layers we got, the more secure we are. And I mentioned that the computer room has got physical security. We don't let people in there. The computer room has these other things. We have a firewall. That means we don't let people that are out in the network sort of interwebs or whatever we want to call it. We don't let them in there. That's what the firewall is doing. We have multiple different ways. So when we log on to our bank account, we have to use our password. We have to use another factor, which is you know, some token that we generate. So this idea of a firewall, it's going to be, in some cases, it's going to be hardware and software put together, because if you're working at the network layer there, you're going to have some communications equipment that faces the Arito, and so that device will typically have firewall in it. So you can have Cisco devices that you can buy that have hardware and software to get together. I guess you'd call that firmware, that can exist as a firewall. Or you can put a firewall onto a router. You yourself, the Windows operating system, you have some software firewall that you can do if you wanted to have your own sort of network thing at home. Yeah, so what is a router? You guys heard of this term before? If you want to connect two networks together, you need to have a router. Router is a device that's required to connect more than one network together. So whenever you connect to the internet, you have your network at home and you connect to the internet, so you must be going through a router. And so on the router, you can put the things like firewalls, etc. You can put security on it. Oh, so some other things that you can do: encryption. We can encrypt all kinds of things. We have a lot of lovely encryption that's available to us. Some of you guys use WhatsApp, maybe you use Signal. So some of these type of social media, one of the selling points that they have is that everything is end-to-end encrypted. And so they use a, I don't know, 128, I think, bit key. The idea of that is that the sender and the receiver share a key. I mean, that's done by the software for us. And what's actually sent over the network. So I'm using WhatsApp and I'm talking to Buddy in Canada. I have the key, he has the key. I mean, I type in some stuff to WhatsApp. When that goes out onto the internet, anybody who intercepts that, and that's possible, right? You know, Buddy number 2 is sitting in a network sort of place somewhere halfway around the world that that's communications going through. They intercept that. What do they see? It's just zeros and ones. It doesn't mean anything, right? It's just scrambled, right? The only way to unscramble it is you have to have the same key that I used, and WhatsApp provides that end to end. Now, does that mean that nobody will ever be able to read that? So in the United States, as far as I understand, they're the NSA, and can't confirm this, but this is what I've heard. I believe it's true. The NSA demands of some of these companies like WhatsApp that they give them the key. And so that means that they can, now, I think that's true. I mean, I'd have to confirm it because they have laws in the United States to sort of stop the government from snooping, but that doesn't stop them from doing it really. Imagine if they have the key, that means that they could sort of target somebody and say, well, you know, these guys, we don't think they're great. Let's sort of find out what they're saying to each other on WhatsApp. Actually, that was the selling point of Signal. Any of you guys heard of Signal? Maybe used it? The Signal people, because WhatsApp's owned by Facebook, right? And so Facebook basically said, well, you know, maybe we're going to be able to use that stuff. We're going to keep it, whatever. And so Signal came up as a competitor to WhatsApp, and that was their thing, saying, well, they've sort of sold their soul to the non-privacy people, but we're going to keep it going. Anyway, so this idea of the transport layers security, when we say layer in this way, we're talking about a bunch of protocols that are used in computer communication. And there's actually like about 7 of these. And in the middle, so at the bottom layers are your hardware, all right? And then in the middle, you have your transport layer. Oh, sorry, your second, third layer. Your third layer is your internet layer. That's where you have all your IP addresses, those type of things. Your second layer is where you have your MAC addresses. Have you guys done any hardware? You've done some, right? So you've heard of those things, right? Well, the transport layer is kind of in the middle. I think it's like layer 5 or layer 4. And transport layer, there's 2 different protocols that they use. One protocol, as it says there, the TLS, one protocol has it requires what would you call it, handshaking. So that is that the 2 devices over the network, one has to send a request, then the other one has to send an acknowledgement before you can do the transfer. And that's a lot more secure. So it adds a little extra security to it, but it also means that you don't drop and lose packets. But the problem is that also means that it's a little bit slower. So you want to have a bit more security, you're getting a little bit slower. That's the same thing with a firewall, right? So that's one of the things that we might notice. We put all kinds of sort of extra security onto our network devices, then we find things slow down a bit. Then we complain, right? Yeah, maybe. All right, so going back to the firewall, there's lots of other things you can sort of added features which are not even to do with security that you can add to the firewall. So in the firewall, you can have, so to make sure that people can't ping from outside of Qatar and sort of find your IP address and then start attacking you, your firewall will stop that. because you have a proxy and your IP address is hidden from the outside world. So you can do that. But other things that you can do in the firewall, which would slow it down, is you can filter traffic based on where it's coming from or on what kind of traffic it is. And so here the government doesn't like, what I understand, doesn't like pornography and stuff like that. And fair enough, right? And so, I mean, that type of traffic would be filtered out. That's good, because none of us want that, but it will slow things down. Yeah, because that means that they have to have some way of finding out if that traffic's there. Now, we had a bit of a problem with them doing some of that filtering a few years ago, because what they're able to do actually is they're able to identify packets that come from voice over IP packets or video packets. And that's because they're losing some money, right? Everybody was using Skype, instead of making phone calls. And so that costing the phone network money. And so they were filtering those out so that they couldn't get through the firewall. And so the only way you could get through the firewall is you had to do a sneaky thing, a bit of tunneling, and use a VPN. And then Skype turned around and said, well, we're not going to accept end-to-end on a VPN. Anyways, we kind of got past that. And I think the reason why we got past that is we've all kind of moved to sort of 4G and 5G. And so the telephone company, they're making money anyways, because everything's going in packets. And so they don't really care where it goes. I think that's what's happened. All right. I mentioned the transport layer that slows things down. There's one that's a lot faster. When you're watching a YouTube video, it's not doing that handshake. I mean, so it's coming through on a different protocol. And that's why sometimes when you're watching a YouTube video, you'll see it go kind of lines on it, and it sort of goes pixelated, and it seems like you lose some of the data. That's because you do. So there's two different types of protocols that you can use, and one of them is more secure. If you're going to do banking, you definitely use the security. So that brings us to the proxy server. As I mentioned, proxy server is going to be sort of hiding there behind your firewall, and it's going to be fooling people when they try and figure out what your IP address is to attack you. You're not going to be able to do that. The virtual private network, who doesn't use that? I don't know. Who does use that? I use it. Yes, just yesterday, my daughter asked me, can you give me the account thing for your VPN? Because everybody wants a VPN. So why would you want a VPN? So some people used it so that they could get Netflix and watch the movies that people in the US were watching, right? That's one reason. Because you can, with the VPN, you can say that you can connect to a server in another country, and then people on the other end will think that you're in that country when they look at your IP address, because you've got an IP address which is assigned to that country. So that's nice. And now the other reason that you might want to use it is supposing you're in an airport, and so you're connecting to a Wi-Fi there. You don't know who's pulling that data off, right? You could have some very smart person sort of sitting in a chair beside you who's got tools like Wireshark or whatever, and they're analyzing all your data that's going up and down from the Wi-Fi. Right now, that is encrypted on the way, but encryption is how good, right? So they could be doing that, and you're doing your banking, and that's kind of a bad thing. So if you're going to buy anything or shop it while you're in the airport, definitely use a VPN, because a VPN, all of that will just be scrambled, and nobody will be able to read it. And yeah, so I would do that. Okay, so the intrusion detection system, what that means is that you have some software or hardware onto your computer network, and if anybody tries to make an attack, you will get an alert. And so this allows you to sort of see that you're under attack. Now, something similar. This is similar to intrusion detection. This is intrusion prevention. So kind of like a next layer up of security. What we have is, so these are automated tools. This is software that you're putting onto your computer system. And what it will do is it'll actually repel attacks. It'll actually stop attacks from happening. So that's a nice thing. We talked about this a little bit, right? So single factor and two-factor authentication. Authentication, what the word means is that the person who's trying to do this transaction on the network is the right person. That's what we mean by authentication. How do we know that it's you? And so we can have physical things, you know what I mean? But they can all be part of the same. So when I say physical things, you know, we're using this, right? Everybody's using this, I think, are we not? I mean, we have that on our phone. And we can open all kinds of applications on it. And that works pretty good because everybody has a unique fingerprint. You also have unique iris. You know what I mean by iris? Your eye. Yeah. So your eyes are, everybody's eye is different. And so there's that. And also your face is different. But, you know, the finger seems to be the one that they kind of like. So that would be part of a single factor. So single factor could involve your fingerprint plus your ID together. And then the next thing that you're going to do is maybe have another factor that you add, which would be one-time. Did you ever guys do this? One-time password. Every time I use my bank, they want that. They send you one on you know, you get an SMS and you can't do the transaction until you've done the SMS. I think I talked about encryption enough, haven't I? Know what encryption means? The root word there, crypt, means to hide, right? Encrypt, you've hidden. So you're sending data in a way that people can't read it. And, you know, we talked about VPN. VPN is just a form of encryption. I mean, yeah, basically, we're just hiding that whole communication from the outside world. Well, it's a little bit more than just encryption because it's encryption that allows you to connect things all over the world. All right. Should we train people in security? Well, yeah. Did we talk in the previous lesson about phishing and spear phishing? Oh, by the way, those, I saw those in the exam as well, right? So phishing, somebody's going to send you an email and say, you know, what's your, I don't know. The first email will be, what's your cutter ID, right? You know, oh yeah, that's fine. Then the next one will be, what's your birthday? All right, yeah. And after like 3 of these things, they figured out enough about you that next thing they do is they go and phone up the bank and say, you know, can I open an account? Here's my ID. Here's my birthday. It's really bad. Actually, some of it happens on Facebook all the time, right? You know, yeah, they'll ask you your birthday in a roundabout way, right? You know, what color, you know, do you like? You know, they're trying to figure out something that you might use for a password. If you see those things on Facebook, don't answer it, right? These are people trying to get your information so that they can steal your identity so that they can defraud you. I mean, if you're going to answer them, just say, you know, something rude. That's what I do. So yeah, don't do that. That would be security education, I think. Phishing. Now there's this, and this does come up in the exam. I noticed it, so I'm going to mention it here. There's this idea of spear phishing. Spear phishing is a special kind of phishing which is targeted. All right, so that would be where somebody sends you an email and it appears that they know you. You know what I mean? It's not this random thing, right? It's like, you know, they'll, if you're in a big company, maybe they're using company logo and it seems like they're one of your bosses or something like that. So a very, very targeted, very slick kind of attempt to get information from you. And you'll, so, I mean, with the whole phishing thing, do notice that your banks, they're always telling the customers this, you know, nobody from the bank will ever call you up and ask for your one-time password. Nobody from the bank will ever call you up or send you a email asking you for your ID. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if you receive an email and it's asking you for that kind of stuff, just don't. I mean, what you should do if that happens to you is you should call the bank and say, hey, you know, I got this email. What do I do? And they will tell you every time, don't answer it and don't give them any information, right? So definitely don't give them your password. Definitely don't give them your bank account number or anything like that. Encryption we've talked about. Antivirus software, I hope you're familiar with that. I mean, you can buy suites of software. When you buy a new computer, it probably comes with some software on it that you can, a trial. McAfee, you guys seen that one? Or Norton, and they will scan your computer and find viruses. Now they have to be up to date. That's why it's worth buying them, because you have the software on there now and it's working, and then there's a new virus that comes out tomorrow. That brings us to this idea of the zero day exploit. I think that came up in the previous lesson. So at the 0 day, people don't know that the exploit is there, or but the next day they do, right? So 0 day, that's kind of that window of opportunity for the hacker people, that they can sort of go out and start defrauding people, messing up their computers, etc. If they are onto that 0. All right, so worst case scenarios. This kind of goes with the idea of the disaster recovery thing. What do we do if we have a security incident? I don't know if I have much to say about that. The notification thing. So supposing you work for a company and you find out that Ukrainian or Russian hackers have sort of, this is your company, you work in it, and that they have somehow got the data of your customers, you know, and so your customers have given you their credit card data and stuff like that. So what are you going to do? All right, you know, when you publish this, that you're going to lose some customers, but depending on where you are, there's probably laws saying that you do have to publish and sort of say that you have been breached. Yeah, I mean, what? Managed security service provider. You can get other companies, you can outsource your security. Now, computer forensics, you know what the word forensics means? Forensics is usually tied with law enforcement. So when we're talking about forensics, what we're talking about is we suspect that a crime has occurred. Then what we do is we try and gather evidence about the crime. So computer forensics is going to be, we're going to go and look at things that happened over the network and see if we can produce evidence for a crime. Or often what it'll be is we're going to go and seize somebody's hard drives or servers, and then we're going to scan through those and we're going to try and identify a crime. Now, you might be surprised to know that, you know, so very non-sophisticated people who are trying to avoid law enforcement, they might do something like, oh, I got some bad things on my hard drive. What I'll do is I'll format it and then it'll be okay. Well, actually, no, because the people who do computer forensics, typically they'll be working for the police department. So there's a job for you. All right, you finished your computer degree and then you go and work for the police. Who knew? Yeah, you're going to be sitting in an office. You're going to be working on these type of things, but you will have some tools where you can take a hard drive that's come off of somebody's computer and maybe they hit it with a hammer, you know, so they formatted it and they hit it with a hammer, and you're going to take that and you're going to get the data off of it. It is actually possible with the tools that they have. There's some tools called autopsy. Anyways, if you're interested in that, Google it. Maybe you like to look in the police, work for the police, and find out bad people by looking on their hard drives. And at last we finished that. Oh my gosh. So